Hey, this is Anthony Davis with Shapeshift Wellness, and in today's video, passive stretching sucks! Also, we're going to be talking about flexibility. Does it matter? How much do you need? Do you need any? Should you stretch? When should you stretch? How much should you stretch? When should you not stretch? We need nuance in order to really say that, for example, passive stretching sucks. Well, even this is not true. Not all the time, not for everybody. I don't think it's useful, but there are still some circumstances that it is useful. I'm going to try to give you nuance. I'm going to present this with research. And if you, at the end of the video, I know some of you already hate this video because I told you that passive stretching sucks. If you don't like the research I present, then come at me with research, not with opinions. Let's check it out. Real quick, make sure to like this video, subscribe to my channel, share this video with your friends to piss them off if they love static stretching, and stick around to the end of the video because I'll make this matter for your yoga practice. I'll show you how this is relevant and how we can improve our practice. All right, let's get to it. Let's start by adding one layer of nuance. So here's an old post from my Instagram. Can't touch your toes? Then how do you put your shoes on? When we talk about stretching, sometimes we make things needlessly complicated. Well, you got to be able to touch your toes with straight legs and without rounding your back and with your heart lifted and just by hinging at the hips. Why? Why do I have to do that? When would I ever do that in real life? When would I ever need to touch my toes with perfectly straight legs and a not rounded back? That's a ridiculous setup, right? And we do that in yoga all the time. And not just in yoga, but, I'm a chiropractic student, and I know that when we're looking at posture and we're looking at mobility, general range of motion tests for a person, we're trying to assess if their body moves well. We're taught to look for things like, oh, can they touch their toes? Are they rounding their back? Are they compensating by bending a knee or this or that or shifting their hips or whatever? Does that matter? Why are we having them touch their toes with straight legs? That's not a thing that humans do, not most of us anyway, unless you're a dancer or you have some special requirement for your job. So we're making the test, the assessment, an impassable test and not a relevant test to a person's actual daily activities. Can you touch your toes? No, you probably can't with straight legs and all of the constraints that we put on you. But can you touch your toes? Yes, of course you can. You just bend your legs, you bend your knees, you hinge at the hips, you bend your knees, you sit down, you do one leg at a time, you put your shoes on. So don't freak out if you can't touch your toes. It doesn't matter because guess what? You can still put your shoes on, right? And that's what matters. But enough of my opinions. To the research. So let's explore one of my favorite review articles on flexibility. This is called The Case for Retiring Flexibility as a Major Component of Physical Fitness by James Nuzzo. Fair warning, this is a narrative review. This is not a systematic review or a meta-analysis, or a guideline, meaning they did not have to follow a specific set of criteria to select the research that they're pulling from. Therefore, there is a risk of bias. So if you disagree with the findings from this article, comment below with research to support your views. But let's see what this article said. I like this article because he just summarizes a lot of key sort of hot topics, things that we believe about stretching that are not necessarily true. And it's all in one place. That's why I like this article. So let's start off with what is everybody taught about flexibility? Everybody that's a personal trainer, yoga teacher, anybody who's doing their exercise science degrees, whatever. Basically, we're taught this, that flexibility is important for athletic performance and that it's important in the ability to carry out our activities of daily living and that it may prevent injury. Essentially, we're taught flexibility matters and it should be a primary component of physical fitness. But should it? Let's find out. So let's look at injury and pain. So does flexibility matter in preventing injury or reducing pain? Well, it turns out that, so a lot of these studies, by the way, are going to be using sit and reach scores that is a common way of assessing general flexibility. So it's not perfect. It's not the only way to do this. This is one way and it's a common way. So just FYI. So sit and reach scores do not predict future incidents of low back pain or injury, doesn't prevent hamstrings injuries in many different types of athletes. And we can't necessarily predict who is going to have low back pain based on their flexibility. So if somebody is inflexible, never scare them and say, "Oh, you're going to have back pain," because that's not necessarily true. It doesn't correlate. So does flexibility prevent injury or reduce pain? No, not necessarily. In fact, high levels of flexibility might actually increase your injury risk by becoming hypermobile, and especially if that hypermobility is in a range of motion that you cannot control. You do not have the strength to control yourself in that range of motion. That we find that maybe there's an increased risk of various injuries. They looked at a bunch of different athletes in different sports, and they found, I actually don't have pictures of these, but in this article you can find it, that in certain sports, it was actually more beneficial to be less mobile, depending on the sport. Even though in dancers who are notorious for being extremely flexible, that the ones among them who had excess mobility beyond what was required to do the dance moves, so those who had extra flexibility relative to their peers were tended to get more injuries. So that's pretty interesting. Even in a very hypermobile sport, dancing, the ones who were additionally mobile, who had more flexibility than they needed to accomplish the task, had more injuries. So of course, flexibility matters for dancers. You have to have enough flexibility to do the thing, to do the dancing, to do the moves that you need to do. You know, an ice hockey goalie needs so much internal rotation of the hip joint. A baseball pitcher needs to have a ton of external rotation of their shoulder. But too much may be a risk, and too little might be a risk. The point is, you need to be able to do the activity that is relevant to you. So you don't need to base it on a generic number. Okay. Aging. Essentially, does it matter for elderly people to be flexible? One of the common beliefs is that you need flexibility in order to reduce your risk of falling and your risk of being disabled, essentially, in old age. And this article shows us by the way, if you don't read research a lot, all these little numbers, these, 80, 81, 82, those are all just references, and you'd find them at the bottom of this paper, blah, blah, blah. So these articles are showing us that no, flexibility did not reduce fall risk, and it did not reduce the ability for older adults to do their activities of daily living, even if they were more flexible. It didn't help them. Delayed onset muscle soreness. This is another big belief, that stretching will reduce your delayed onset muscle soreness. The soreness the day after that you work out. So stretching before or after exercise, neither one of them helped to prevent DOMS. Cardiovascular stuff. Is stretching, is being flexible important for your cardiovascular outcomes, your heart health, and your vessels? Well, no, it didn't correlate with blood pressure or resting heart rate. So flexibility did not improve those outcomes. Mortality. So generally speaking, if you're more flexible, do you live longer? No. However, compare that to things like body composition, cardiovascular endurance, muscle endurance, muscle strength, and muscle power, and all of those things are predictive of mortality. If you have better body composition, cardio endurance, muscle strength, and muscle power, you are more likely to live longer. But if you are more flexible, you are not more likely to live longer. You're not less likely to live longer. It doesn't make a difference. Do you need to stretch before exercise? Well, no, actually. In fact, it might reduce your muscle force and power. So you might be less strong, less powerful. Now, the difference is not like night or day. It's not like your muscles turn off. That's not a real thing. But it does slightly reduce your power. So especially if you're a high level athlete, or if you just stretch for a really, really long time before you exercise, then you might reduce your ability to perform the thing. And it's not just about high level athletes too here, because you can see that Stretching also reduces repetitions completed and training volume during essentially your exercise. So if you're trying to get a good workout in, then stretching beforehand might actually reduce your ability to do the volume of training that you wanted. All right. And let's see, fibromyalgia. So a lot of times, you know, stretching but stretching, it feels so good. It reduces my pain. Does it? Well, let's find out. So people with fibromyalgia, we found that stretching does not improve pain intensity, physical function, fatigue, or aerobic training. In contrast to that, resistance training did improve those things for people with fibromyalgia. What if you just, look, Anthony, I need flexibility, okay? Don't tell me I don't need to be flexible. Okay, I'm not. You need to have as much flexibility as you want to have. That's fine. If you like stretching, that's fine. But I would suggest that if your goal is to improve your range of motion, and that's the only thing you really care about, you're not married to like static stretching because you love static stretching. You just want to be able to touch your toes because, well, who cares? You want to do it and that's your goal. Then I would suggest that, you know, if you look at the research right here, then we see that resistance training through a full range of motion under load is going to increase, in this case, the sit and reach scores, which is literally your ability to touch your toes or beyond. It increases that range of motion at least equal to the amount of increase in range of motion that you would see from stretching. So you don't have to stretch to gain range of motion, to gain flexibility. You can weight train to gain flexibility as long as you're weight training through your full range of motion. So if you like weight training more, then just make sure you're doing it through a full range of motion if your goal is to improve your range of motion. Okay, you don't need to stretch passively and statically in order to improve your range of motion. There are lots of other ways to do it. This paper is not saying that flexibility is irrelevant or that it does not matter. This paper is also not talking about dynamic stretching. It is only talking about static stretching. It is basically saying that flexibility should not be a primary focus of physical fitness for all people. It should be applied in special circumstances or as a secondary outcome. And it's suggesting that if flexibility, we don't need to continually like push our flexibility. It's not a more is better scenario. It's a maybe a mid-range of flexibility is the best. Sort of like, I know there are problems with body mass index, BMI. I know there are a lot of problems with that, but sometimes as a general quick assessment for some people, we might find that too much or too little can be a warning sign. Well, maybe the same with flexibility. Maybe we want to be more like Goldilocks and have flexibility that is in the mid-range, that is applicable to our hobbies, our activities. We don't need more. We don't want less. We want enough to do the things we love to do. So if you're trying to stretch your hamstrings and improve hamstrings flexibility, this is a post, again, I made a while ago. Maybe the best way to do that is a deadlift. At least it's a very good way of doing it. So I bring this up to suggest to yoga people that, look, there is just, you know, I am constantly trying to find ways of incorporating more strength into our yoga practice. But at the end of the day, where is the line between doing a yoga practice and pretending like we're going to gain strength and just pursuing strength? It's okay to pursue strength. I know a lot of yoga people don't like to pick up weights and they don't want to be meatheads or whatever. But the fact is that there's only so much you can do to a yoga practice without adding weights to it, which there's a stigma against that. A lot of people hate yoga classes where they bring in the weights. And I get it. It doesn't feel like a meditative practice anymore, not usually. So if that's what you're after, do your yoga and just do yoga. But when you want to gain strength, pick up weights. It's a much more effective way of doing it. So just realize that yoga can't accomplish everything that you want. You cannot gain agility or quickness or power or strength really with yoga. And that's okay. It's fine. Yoga is amazing for all of these other things. So maybe think out of the box, people who do yoga, and do other activities. All right. Go for a run, pick up some weights. You don't have to. But if you want strength, and power and agility, you probably should. This is another old post. It shouldn't be so easy to confuse yoga with contortionism. If you harm yourself, you're not practicing yoga because of the principle of ahimsa, which is non-harming. So literally the first thing in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, the first, under the first limb, yamas, whatever. And then we have ahimsa. Don't harm yourself. So if we're forcefully stretching, if we're pushing ourselves into really uncomfortable positions because we have this peer pressure of, more is better, we've got to put our foot over our head or we're like a bad person, that's stupid. And this is the kind of thing that I used to do, a lot of, is forcing myself into these positions. And yes, I was able to find some meditation. And yes, it was a very exhilarating experience to be able to put my body in these positions. But at the end of the day, if I'm being honest with myself, I was not comfortable in these positions. It was forceful. And that's why I think I ended up having a lot of joint pain and injury, is I was just pushing way too hard, too fast, and forcing myself because of the pressure and the association of yoga with hypermobility, and that somehow being more flexible also makes you more spiritual. All of these things, can lead people to pushing too hard, too fast, too much, and hurting themselves. So, again, this is not necessarily saying that all flexibility is bad. I'm not saying that. If you like to stretch, stretch, but don't push yourself. Don't force anything. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at is, is flexibility important? Well, in yoga, we generally assume that flexibility, of course, flexibility is important, that you have to stretch and that more is better. And I made this video to address, not to say that flexibility is useless. Okay. The title is a little bit catchy and provocative, and it's meant to be because, flexibility is not nearly as useful as we think, and it's certainly not necessarily useful for the reasons or for the things that we think it's useful for. So, is flexibility important? Well, not necessarily. If you don't like stretching, you don't have to. If you don't, enjoy it, then if you can't touch your toes, it doesn't matter. Nobody cares. Your health is not going to be worse because you can't touch your toes, unless your daily activities involve touching your toes and you can't do it. Then that's going to suck because you can't do the things you love to do, right? If I want to play volleyball, for example, and I don't have shoulder range of motion to reach over my own head, I'm going to have a bad time because I can't do a basic function of my joint that is relevant to the activity that I love, which is volleyball in this hypothetical scenario. So again, if you're asking, is flexibility important? Well, do you have enough range of motion to accomplish both passive and active range of motion to accomplish the activities that you like doing and that you want to be able to do when you get older? So if you want to be able to get down on the floor and get up again without using your hands when you're 80 years old, then start now and make sure you do that all day long. So if I say you don't need to stretch, which I'm saying right here, humans don't need to stretch. Well, I'm saying specifically humans don't need to passively, statically stretch as long as they maintain full range of motion through active daily living, through their activities. Okay, so you don't need to just sit there and stretch your hamstrings if you don't enjoy doing that. But if you want to be able to touch your toes, then you should do that actively, right? You could swing your leg or whatever. If you want to be able to get up off the floor and get down onto the floor without using your hands, practice doing that daily. You don't need to just stretch your glutes and stretch out your, hips and all that stuff, right? So there's a better way and there's another way, right? So at this point, I think that's enough. So again, if you didn't agree with something, comment with research, not with opinions. Comment with research, please, because this is not the full story. There's a lot more nuance to this discussion, and I'm open to looking at it and presenting it in video form too. Because there's a lot more. So if you've got questions, leave them in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell for notifications, and I'll see you in the next episode.